Hello and welcome to another episode of the Midnight Monologues. I'm your host, Lavinia Gardner. Tonight's movie is considered a cult classic from 1976, The Little Girl Who Lives Down the Lane. I don't know who directed it because I don't like this movie enough to give a fuck, honestly. But there are some things that I really do like about this movie, so let's get into it. This movie began as a book, which began as a play, at least in the author's mind. He conceived of it as a play, but the main character, Rin, is 13, and no matter the talent of the actress tapped for the role, he knew she would grow out of it in just 2 or 3 years' time, if not even faster. So the idea of it as a play was scrapped, and it just became a movie instead. In part 2 of tonight's episode, we'll discuss the book itself, which is available on Kindle. This movie stars Jodie Foster at 13, Mort Shuman at the age of 36, which we'll talk about later, and other people you have never heard of. Only Jodie Foster and Mort Shuman went on to have long-standing careers in Hollywood. I don't think it had anything to do with this movie. I'm just pointing out that nobody else in it is a household name in the way that Jodie Foster and Mort Shuman are. The man who plays Officer Miglioretti, Mort Shuman, was actually an American singer-songwriter and was supposed to do the music for this movie, but he passed it off onto his arranger instead. The film's director thought that Chopin's number 1 in E minor was the perfect score to the film, with its themes in his mind of hope, absolution, and sadness. That's also the music you've been listening to throughout this intro. Isn't it lovely? It's a cross-genre film, so it's a little thriller, it's a little mystery. It's listed as a horror movie on Amazon, but it only works as a horror movie on a certain level, a level that's kind of disturbing. I could take a lot, but it still was a little disturbing. Nevertheless, it did win 2 Saturn Awards, including Best Horror Film. And like I said, it has a cult status, mainly because of the screenplay, though. So let's take a look at the trailer for The Little Girl Who Lives Down the Lane.
They called her the little girl who lives down the lane. All alone in that big house. Who was she? And what was her secret? A lot of people wondered. Like Mario, the local comedian.
Somebody's out there.
Officer Miglioretti, the local cop.
I don't believe what you've been telling me about your father.
You're a very pretty girl, you know that? Pretty eyes.
Frank Hallett, the local creep. And nasty Mrs. Hallett, the local gossip.
Mrs. Hallett, I'm warning you!
I want to know what's been happening here in this house. I want to know what happened here today!
I think I should warn you that the police are watching our house right this very minute, Mr. Hallett.
Aren't you scared?
Of what?
Of being alone. No one to know about us.
I never knew how much I needed you.
Now listen to me, young lady. I know you're up to something.
Go in that study, Mrs. Hallett, and I tell my father about your son. I even had to ask him why the police don't do anything about it.
Why should they do anything?
When your son gives candy to pretty little girls.
Academy Award nominee Jodie Foster, Mort Shuman, Alexis Smith.
Get out of here!
The little girl who lives down the lane.
This movie suffers quite a bit from not knowing actually what it wants to be. This is absolutely illustrated by the soundtrack, which makes no kind of sense. I honestly think that the Chopin would have been a much better choice to use to score the movie than what we ended up with, which was a strange hybrid of horror and 70s disco music. with these visuals and this music, it really gives me more daytime soap opera than horror or murder mystery. I swear sometimes parts of this movie make it look like a really extreme episode of Dallas.
Nasty Mrs. Hallett, the local gossip.
I want to know what's been happening here in this house. I want to know what happened here today.
I even had to ask him why the police don't do anything about it.
Why should they do anything?
When your son gives candy to pretty little girls.
Okay, so you see what I'm saying about Dallas, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's hard to get real thrills and chills from a soap opera like atmosphere, and especially with that music, which was just a tragic. The real horror of that movie was that fucking music, let me tell you. But the characters were really good, and they did a really good job on the film. In fact, one of the reviewers said that this was the most accurate portrayal of a teenage girl that Jodie Foster had ever put out on screen so far. So, and all of the actors in it, despite not being well known other than Martin Sheen, were actually really good. For example, Alexis Smith is amazing in this film. She comes across as a little bit slightly older vamp. I mean, in a big city, she would be more of a femme fatale. But she happens to live in a small town in New England. And she is just perfect for this role. And she does it so well. And she's mostly an episodic television actress, which explains the vibe of it being like a Dallas episode on steroids.
Nasty Mrs. Hallett, the local gossip.
You told my son your father wished to speak to him? I certainly wish to speak to him. Call him.
Well, he's translating right now. I couldn't disturb him even for Officer Miglioriti.
Officer Miglioriti works for people like me. In case you're wondering, I'm waiting right here until you do call your father.
You never answered about the tea.
For the life of me, I can't imagine what made any of us think you could be happy here.
My father and I love this house.
No, I think we'll make other plans.
Our lease is for 3 years.
Leases have been known to be broken. Unless, of course, your father and I could come to some understanding.
And what would that be, Mrs. Hallett?
There it is again, that continual mocking tone. And don't look at me with those hurt eyes and pretend you've been misunderstood. You and I both know you say exactly what you intend.
Go in that study, Mrs. Hallett, and I tell my father about your son.
Why should they do anything?
When your son gives candy to pretty little girls.
So you could be forgiven for thinking it was an episode of Dallas. With that title card and the disco music, it just didn't fit right with the film. But Alexis Smith was amazing in that role. She was the perfect wasp bitch, but she has that sort of, like I said, femme fatale energy, but she's stuck in small town New England. Alexis Smith was in Gentleman Jim with Errol Flynn. So it's not like, I mean, we don't know who she is, and I didn't remember who she was, but she was not a nobody. She was pretty well known in Hollywood when they cast her in the role. And then we have Scott Jacoby. I don't know him either. This is the only thing I think I've ever seen him in. He was the one who plays Mario, her teenage love interest. They never say his age in the film. He's somewhere between 15 and 16, I would say. Scott Jacoby moved to New York when he was 10, and by the age of 12, he'd been nominated for a fucking Tony Award. So he was also very, very good at what he did. I think that his role was way underused in this film. I don't know if they just didn't know what to do with him or what. It just seemed like an odd miscasting, and it didn't work out for me.
Like Mario, the local comedian.
Somebody's out there.
Hi. You been driving long? How come you're in this car?
How come you're dressed up like that?
Because I'm a magician.
And what's that, your magic wand?
Oh, it's my cane. I'm a cripple.
I guess I should say I'm sorry.
Why? It's not your fault. Saturday, when all my brothers are playing football, I'm putting on a magic show for some rich kid's birthday party.
Let's see you do something magic.
Yeah, let's see you do something magic. Great, now let's see you do something useful. Exactly. Most of the people who reviewed the movie when it came out said that they really liked the romance aspect of the movie, which isn't terrible, but within the context of the film, did not come off well. If she's 13, he's 16, there's a nude shot. It wasn't a good choice. And the film had some controversy because of that before it even opened. One person who was cast pretty close to type and did a really, really good job with it was Mort Shuman, who played the cop, Miglioriti, who was also the uncle of Scott Jacoby's Magician Kid character. Shuman was a singer-songwriter who co-wrote Can You Guess? Yep. Shuman also had other hits in France, so he was pretty well known for his musical skills, but not necessarily for his acting skills. He did a great job in the role, though, and brought some much-needed warmth and paternal presence in a movie about a girl who has a father that no one has seen in months. Shuman was born in Brooklyn, New York, of Polish-Jewish immigrants, and went to Abraham Lincoln High School, where he learned to love R&B music. After graduation, he wrote hits for Dion, the Flamingos, Andy Williams, Bobby Darin, Fabian, Ajda Peckin, the Drifters, and Elvis Presley, among others. Some of their most famous songs include A Teenager in Love, Turn Me Loose, This Magic Moment, Save the Last Dance for Me, Little Sister, Can't Get Used to Losing You. Oh wow, I've heard of actually some of those. And here's Mort Shuman.
Officer Miglioretti, the local cop.
You know, it can be pretty nice here in the village once you get used to it, you know? And just don't let Mrs. Howard hassle you.
Your son says I'm a pretty girl.
Is that what he said?
What is he, a pervert? Well, I guess that means little girls shouldn't accept candy from him.
Not if they're smart little girls.
Don't worry, I won't.
So that's Mort Shuman adding a much-needed gravitas to the role of Officer Miglioriti. In a movie that goes so dark and twisted at certain moments, it's nice to have an adult on screen who really cares about Ren and her safety and is not trying to take advantage of her in any way. And he has the best fucking ties. This movie also stars Martin Sheen, 36-year-old Martin Sheen, who read the book and wanted to play the love interest. The role played by the little magician, Martin Sheen wanted that role for himself. At the time of filming, Martin Sheen also had a 13-year-old daughter himself.
You're a very pretty girl, you know that? Pretty eyes.
Frank Hallett, the local creep.
Anyway, in the film's most brilliant typecasting decision ever, Martin Sheen plays a complete and total asshole.
I want to know what's been happening here in this house. I want to know what happened here today.
This film also stars Jodie Foster. At 13 years old, she had already done Taxi Driver with rave reviews. For a little girl who lives down the lane, reviewers said this was her most accurate portrayal of a teenage girl they had seen so far. There was some controversy over a nude scene that Foster did not want to shoot until a body double was brought in. Possibly Foster's mother's presence on the set is a factor in why she continued to thrive in her Hollywood career, as she and Martin Sheen are the only two stars of this movie to have a continued career. As we all know, sometimes other child actors don't fare so well. There are also really disturbing off-screen animal violence. Under normal circumstances, that wouldn't bother me so much, seeing as how it's off-screen. I wouldn't like it. But the sound editing is so wonderful in this movie that it makes those scenes even more disturbing than they normally would be. Martin Sheen is a creep, both in the movie and in real life. No motherfucking cap. But I will just shrug at this one bit right here. But I mean, if someone was walking around doing this all day in front of me,
I want to know what's been happening here in this house.
yeah, I'd be like,
I want to know what happened here today.
okay, fuck you. So it is a horror movie if you count the animal torture scenes, but they're just not needed and they don't make any sense in the story. Because if your uncle's a third-generation New York City cop, then there's no way that even at 15 years old, back then, you would allow some psychopath to put out the eyes of your girlfriend's hamster with a lit cigarette.
Where's your father, Ren? Do you love Gordon?
Yes.
Yes, what?
Yes, I love Gordon.
And I think Gordon loves you too.
Oh my god, Madison. I just watched the grossest movie with Skylar. This movie is so terrible. It's worse than Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ. I mean, this one has animal torture, Madison. Oh my god. And guess what else is in the movie? There is the most shocking display I have ever seen of cultural appropriation. And this movie has vaccine misinformation.
If you tell me about the car, I'll tell you why I'm crippled, okay?
No.
It was polio shots.
So I guess this movie is a horror movie if you view it through a certain lens. But that puts it in the realm of almost 70s exploitation. So between the attempt to make 13-year-old Jodie Foster appear nude, almost fully frontal, as well as the back, which she did not want to do, by the way, so they brought in another actress to be her body double. That 21-year-old actress who agreed to go nude for the film in place of Jodie Foster was none other than... No, it was her sister. 13-year-old Jodie Foster's mother agreed to have Jodie's 21-year-old sister appear nude on screen in a mid to low budget horror film. Given the Hollywood's excesses in the exploitation age, I'm sure we're all glad that 13-year-old Jodie Foster was spared the indignity of a nude scene that didn't appear in the book. I hope her considerably less famous sister fared just as well. While some reviews said the movie lacked a decent plot and was unrealistic in places, almost all of them agreed that the romance aspect was one of the strongest parts of the movie. One reviewer said the film looked terrible, like it was shot over a weekend with a handheld camera, to which I have to vehemently disagree. There are shots in this film that are some of the most beautiful I've seen in any movie in a long time. The cinematography is just the right mix of beautiful and shocking. And the sound mixing is great too. It's really on par with the movie Hereditary, which is one of my favorite sound mixes in films. That and Dunkirk. So the movie's shot well and the sound editing is good, which makes for some interesting scares along the way, with it put it firmly in the horror genre. But then the director fucks them up. This is without a doubt one of the most tension-filled movies I have ever seen.
Hello, Gordon.
Like this scene where you can't quite tell if he's just broken Gordon's neck. It's very intense.
Where's your father, Ren?
There's no doubt that Sheen is absolutely menacing in this film. In the book, Gordon was a rat instead of a hamster. I don't know why the author chose a rodent that most people don't like anyway, or if he just didn't think of hamsters as pets or what, but in the book, Gordon is a rat. And Mr. Hallett puts out both the rat's eyes with his lit cigarette. It's a graphic scene that is horrifying, but again, it comes across as very exploitation in the movie and in the novel. Because like I said, no teenage boy from that background would just sit there. He'd stop it. Because his uncle is a cop. And Hallett is bound by the law, even though it's shown that the town usually looks the other way. I think this is a bridge too far, in my opinion. The torture with the cigarette and it being in both eyes makes it too deliberate to have been an accident, which is exactly what Hallett would have tried to say if the kid had called his cop uncle. So having a pet with two burned eyes would not be a thing that's easily explained, no matter how rich your bitch-ass mom is. And even if the kid never makes it to the phone, he would have stood up to try to stop it. So the movie not only has pedophilia, it also has animal torture that occurs off-screen, but the sound mixing is so good that it makes it disturbing. But then again, I've also had rats and hamsters as pets, so I was particularly bothered by this scene. Though I can watch scenes of gore and violence, one of my favorite movies is Ravenous. It's a cannibalism horror set in the Old West. It's really disgusting and gory, but I love it. But this off-screen animal torture in Little Girl Who Lives Down the Lane and the full-on graphic torture that occurs in the novel are just way too gratuitous. Sheen loved the book, by the way. That's how he got the audition. He talked to the director about his love of the book. So this movie might qualify as a horror on some level, but there's a lot of disco and dynasty going on to take it seriously as you should. And then there's all that dramatic twirling going on.
Get out of here!
The little girl who lives.
But it's
down
also
the
a
lane.
horror movie. It's a horror! I mean, it does have that small-town New England horror vibe. I really get a Shirley Jackson feel from the novel, which is a really interesting read. It's very 70s, and it showcases that 70s penchant for exploitation. I'm going to do a second part on the book, because this video is getting too long, I think, to do it both at once. I did like certain aspects of the book, especially the fact that it was originally conceived of as a play. But overall, I did like the cinematography and the mystery aspect of it. There were several scenes I would have cut out, especially the exploitation scenes, and I would have reworked some of those characters so that they made a little more sense. But all in all, it was a very interesting movie to watch, and it's turning out to be an even more interesting book to read. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in to the second episode of the Midnight Monologues. I'm your host, Lavinia Gardner. I've written 15 books, but only one horror novel. If you want to check it out, it's available on Amazon, and the link is in the description. Thanks for tuning in to my little breakdown of The Little Girl Who Lives Down the Lane.
You should see the way the fire lights up your hair. All yellow, gold. Such lovely hair.
So that's Mort Shuman as Officer Miglioretti, who brings a much needed gravity and